Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And if you've hung around with me for any amount of time on the internet, you may remember that my story goes like this. I was raised around Christianity by super good parents who were still super good parents. But it was kind of that version of Christianity that was really built to work super well and make a ton of sense in the mid to late 20th century. And I got in on it in the very late 20th century in terms of coming of age and starting to think about things for myself. And like a lot of people, that got pretty tricky as you turned the page into the 21st century. I think a lot of people figured out that there's a lot of beautiful stuff about that particular expression of Christianity, but also I don't know, any expression of Christianity from any era, I suppose. Some cultural things get tagged on, and there's some stuff that maybe doesn't age well, and that maybe at some point in your life you realize, whoa, wait a minute, I got to think this through a little bit more. For me, it was maybe a little bit more than that. I had a really tough stretch where some stuff went wrong at church. Back then, I thought it was all everybody else's fault. With time, I think I see more my role in that. And some stuff hurt real bad personally. And the result was that clear sense of the presence and the reality of God that I felt growing up that had just never been even tricky or difficult, almost taken for granted. It stopped being there one day. It was a very tricky and difficult time. I don't think I was super mad at anybody. It was just, I don't know, it was hard. And I guess you can just read between the lines as to all the reasons that it might be, or imagine all the reasons that might have been hard. But it was very honest, and I didn't really go public with it or announce things to people or whatever, but I just went through a hard time that I think is similar to a hard time that probably a lot of you who are listening to this have gone through at some point in your faith as well. It's not just a product of the moment in which we live. I think the journey of faith is often kind of complex, and it happens in phases and chapters. And I went through a dark one. It was tough, and it was a chapter of not belief, but sincere not belief. And again, not clouded by anger or emotion, I don't think. It just, it wasn't there. And all of my intellectual assent to think correct phrases about Christianity and the Bible were not enough to prop that up in those moments, because at the very visceral level, I did not believe there was a God. Now, I know that there are a bunch of you who are listening to this right now, and you're like, oh yeah, dang, been there. I kind of get that. Or, I went through a process that was a little bit different. Maybe I never quite got there, but sure, I really understand. There are probably others of you who are like, that causes a theological problem, because can you be a Christian and then not a Christian? Can you believe in God and then not? And I don't know. I know there are a lot of opinions about stuff like that. I can just tell you what I went through and what it was like. But here's an interesting nugget that I've never shared about that time in my life. I still prayed during that time, but it was different. It was at times a prayer of, hey, if you're real and this is an actual thing, I would like to know that, and I would want to believe what is true and what is real. And if you are not, then I'm guessing nobody's hearing this, so what's the harm? There was that, and again, I don't know, maybe it's stupid for me to share that with you. Maybe that's a dumb thing to put in front of people, but that's the truth. That's the kind of stuff. But every now and then, I would run into a tight spot during that time of difficulty and question and rebuilding things, or whatever you want to call it. And when I was under serious pressure, my instinct would very much be go to a power that is greater than me, outside of me. So God, right? But then you go to pray about something that you need, or that somebody else needs who you love, and it feels kind of weird, because you're like, oh, well, I'm in this place right now, and am I allowed to ask? If a belief isn't exactly my strong suit at the moment, but I would anyway. And I remember how those prayers went. There was this whole preamble on the front end of all of them about like, okay, obviously, if you are there and hearing this, you completely understand the situation. You know where I'm at. You understand that if I'm wrong, I am sincerely wrong. I'm not trying to be antagonistic or anything. I also know that I don't really get to strike any bargains with you if you are there and you are hearing this. So I'm not trying to make some kind of case here where like I'm owed something, or if you give me this thing, then finally it'll solve the problems of the moment and the process of faith or not faith that I'm in, right? It was weird. I felt like I had to make all of these dances. And it wasn't, I don't think, God putting that pressure on me. It was just, that's where I was. I felt that pressure to sort of acknowledge, hey, here is what has not gone completely perfect for me. Some of that's my fault. Some of that's other people's fault. Some of that's probably nobody's fault. But I know what your standards are, because if you exist, you're perfect. And I know, stuff that's in the Bible. And so I can think of some very specific things where who I am and what I do does not square with that, I guess. And so in one way or another, I would find myself opening this prayer with some kind of confession. I felt the need to. If there's a God who is big enough to care about me and care about the situations that are going on here in my life, then that God would necessarily have to be much bigger and more powerful than me, or why am I asking him to do something about it? So it would only make sense then to consider the standards of that being and the standards of me and how they don't always line up, and I should acknowledge that on the front end. Just intuitively, without any sense of Christian guilt or anything, I found myself doing that, opening with maybe the most honest times of confession I'd ever had in my life during this time, when I would reach out to God in the midst of not certainty of belief about things that were really weighing on me. And then after I would do that, I would intuitively then kind of pivot to this natural desire to express back to God what he must be if he is hearing me right now. Okay, so if you're there and you're hearing this, that means you are this and this and this. You're powerful. You're all-knowing. You're everywhere. You're all the things that people for millennia have said that you are. You're all the things that the Bible says that you are. I am sorry that at this point in my life, I would pray back then that I don't see that. I don't get it fully. But hey, I'm here. And if I am praying to you and you are hearing it, it means that all those people and the Bible were right and I am wrong. And you are real, and you are powerful, and you are powerful enough to care about my situation, know about my situation, maybe even do something about my situation. And kind of then and only then would I reason myself in these very clumsy, awkward prayers back to being able to say, okay, with that in mind, so-and-so that I care about is going through this, and would you show them your care? Would you show them your comfort or whatever? Or I am really up against it on this thing. Would you intervene in this way? Would you offer courage or encouragement, or just whatever the prayer might have been about? And I look back on that, and this is one of the reasons that I'm really grateful that I went through that time, because I set aside all of my coaching and everything and training, youth group and Sunday school and the stuff that you get taught. And then you got to kind of build it for yourself, because your whole faith is just taken apart and spread out on the metaphorical workshop table right now. It doesn't work. You got extra parts there that you don't know where they go, that ultimately ended up just not going anywhere. You got some parts that need to be there for the build to go back together, but you don't even have them on your table yet. Things are a mess. And yet, just intuitively, simply by the notion of if there's a God who can hear, and if there's a God who would care, then these are things that God must be, and this would be a right posture for me to approach him in, even if I'm in a weird spot. I bring all of that up, one, because we know each other and we talk about things, and every now and then we screw around a little bit less than usual, and for whatever reason, you kind of catch me on a squishy day, and I'm like, all right, there we go. That's some of the stuff that I've walked through with all of these things that we talk about and that we read about. And so I suppose that's one reason. But another reason I bring it up is because I think it really relates to what I see Nehemiah do in Nehemiah chapter 1. And we just had that prayer from Ezra that we looked at a few days ago, however many days ago it was. And it was a pretty intense prayer. And I'm not sure I completely related to that prayer. It seemed pretty foreign. I mean, Ezra's a guy who's pretty confident and seems to kind of have his stuff together. Nehemiah seems like a dude who's a long ways away from everything, living in a completely different world from where the problem he's concerned about is. And the prayer we get from Nehemiah, it sounds a lot more like those kind of clumsy but very, very, very honest prayers that started to happen in my life, interestingly, during one of the real low times in my faith. And I'd like to think that is carried over. So I just sat down, I read this whole prayer. I'm not even going to read it to you today. I'll read you Nehemiah's prayer tomorrow. And I'm like, dang, he just intuited the same thing. He just reasoned to the same thing about who God must be if he's hearing this prayer and if he cares about it, and what a right posture would be before that God if there is a God who can hear it and cares about these things. And Nehemiah reasons to, okay, if there's a God who can hear this and he cares about these things and he's really the God of history and he's really the God of my people and he could really do something about this, he knows everything. And there's no point in me coming at this and being like, look, God, everybody else has made big mistakes in this situation and I'm not really prepared to admit anything, but I'd like you to kind of work in the situation. No, he knows everything. If he's hearing the prayer, he already knows the stuff that you have ownership of, Nehemiah. And so Nehemiah he's honest in his prayer. And I think this is an intellectually honest. I think this is an emotionally honest. I think this is a childlike, beautiful prayer that we get from Nehemiah coming up here. And I think it's born out of a place of deep belief for him, whereas the example I was giving you from my own life was born out of kind of a different place. But either way, I feel a ton of collegiality with it. I feel a ton of empathy and connectedness with how he's coming at this. And I'm very excited to unpack this very honest prayer with you over the next couple of days or however long it's going to take. I always promise like, oh, we'll do it tomorrow. And then it takes like a week or whatever. But hey, it's the beauty of the medium. We can take the time when we want to. And another part of the beauty of the medium is we do it every day. So you kind of get the version of me that you got on that day. And today's the day that I've been thinking about prayer anyway. And my own long journey of faith and the fact that sometimes, this just takes a minute and you don't have to necessarily fix it like right this second. It's meant to be something that you work through over the course of a lifetime. Maybe lifetimes are about the right amount of time to do that. I don't know. So that's where my head's at today. And I'm excited to go and dig into this prayer that I admire and appreciate more tomorrow and however long it takes. Okay. I guess that's everything. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.